Hey, welcome back. I just wanted to pepper in a lot more of these shorter style videos that are just hyper focused on one key idea or one key lesson that has had enormous utility in my life. I had a friend who kept a journal from the time they were 10 years old, and by doing so, they had effectively documented a transcript of their entire development. Every major event, every minor problem, it's all there. So they can always revisit it, and more importantly, they can hand off those lessons to someone else. I had no such practice. And although it makes no sense to dwell on things past, we are in control of something even more powerful, our future. This program is part of my future, and hopefully our future. And although Plus Ultra is in its infancy, I see it as an extension of my mind documenting its development. Though this is my journal, you are getting to read it too. Like you, I don't know when my last day on earth will be, but I've always imagined myself as a father. In fact, that's the only thing I knew I wanted to be from a very young age. I always knew I wanted to be a father. And should I be blessed enough to become one, I'm sure I'm going to share my lessons with my children. But if for some reason that's not in store for me, that's not in my story, then I still want to leave something behind. I want to leave my journal. I want to leave my soul's mark, my lessons to those who are open to receiving them. So to that I say, let's be childlike again. Let's explore the mysteries of this blue planet of ours and the truths of the greater universe. I humble myself before you. I have never and never will claim to be an expert on anything, but that's precisely why my aim is to bring the best people I have access to and the best ideas I could think of in my stead. I want to bring those to you in my stead. So, with that said, let's explore the concept of positive versus negative identities. So, right off the bat, I just want to be clear that I'm not referring to optimistic versus pessimistic identities. If you're new to my content, you should know that I am an advocate for ruthless optimism, and not in spite of shitty circumstances, but especially in shitty circumstances. That's what sets you apart. So, my philosophy is a blend of blanket stoicism with irrational optimism and Nietzschean decisiveness. But that's beyond the scope of today's episode. For today's episode, I wanted to emphasize what negative identity is and what a positive identity is. So, negative identity is something we are not. So, this is very useful when we're adolescents and we're forming who we are and how we fit into our micro societies before we launch into the greater macro society. So, it's very important to know who you are not, what you don't like, and with that comes a lot of exploration, mistakes, and it's pretty uncomfortable phase in most people's lives. But in this stage, I really want to just tip my hat off to my parents. I've luckily had access to travel, but you don't have to travel across different countries to do this. You should just leave. I genuinely believe this, your comfort zone, whatever that looks like to you. And what travel did is it did that for me. So it exposed myself to ridicule. I was in such a weird place. When I was 6 years old, I had left Singapore. I've been living in Singapore for 4 years. And so I had a British accent coming from Asia, but I was Spanish and I was now a kindergartner. And I was just all these weird, I was in all these buckets. But at first, I was kind of, just uncomfortable with it. I was like, what is this? What am I? But then as time goes on, I'm very thankful for that because I essentially was completely uprooted. I could be anything I wanted to be. So negative identities are actually very helpful to establish who you're not. It's a very helpful tool and way to analyze yourself and to think about yourself and how to create and form yourself as you are in this weird stage between child and adult. So in this stage, it's very useful actually to have these negative identities. I am not a smoker, or I am not a nerd, or I am not an athlete, or I am not XYZ, Particularly when you're a teenager, it's terrifying, but it's very, very helpful to even get more negative identities on your belt to see who you're not. So this is a place where you can really, really have some deeply rooted identities. For instance, you can move from I am not an unstable drunk like my father to I am a stable and reliable family man. That's where those negative identities, the deep ones, can start to settle in. But there's a caveat to this. It can become problematic into your adulthood because sometimes these negative identities can dig roots so deep that you are unable to see anything beyond that and you just put a ceiling on your development. For instance, there's someone I know who always says, "Oh, I'm not stupid. Oh, I'm not stupid. Oh, I'm not stupid." And that is a very dark negative identity because it shows how much emphasis you have on not committing errors, and that can really limit your growth because if you want to try new things, if you want to expand in a different arena, you have to go through that initial stage of mistakes. And if you consider yourself not stupid, you will never expose yourself to a situation in which you're a novice. And that can be pretty problematic into exploring life at its full. This is not an invitation to be an absolute dunce, though. You don't want to walk around saying, "Look how dense I am." No, what I am saying though is that you cannot have a healthy relationship with the world if your negative identity is so charged up, right? So let's emphasize this example I just brought up, right? About being stupid. The smartest people I've ever met, they don't lead with that. They don't lead with, "Oh, I'm very smart. I went to XY school." They have this quiet confidence about it. They don't lead with their titles. They don't lead with their degrees. They don't lead with their accomplishments. They let them speak for themselves. So they don't have that negative identity of, "Oh, I'm not stupid." They know they're not stupid. So that there's no need for a negative identity in that realm. If you have a negative identity as strong as "I'm not an idiot" and you carry that around with you all the time, hey buddy, your insecurity is showing. You're working so hard to prove to the world you're not stupid, you're actually raising suspicions of your dumbness, believe it or not. So rather than doing that, just lighten the load. Adopt a positive identity like we're going to go into, okay? Hopefully that helps. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm just going to give an example of a person that came to mind. Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you give him any degree of friction on anything he says, he explodes into an actual hissy fit. So this is a man who has all these degrees, all these accomplishments, wrote some books, but if you are to question him intellectually in anything, he freaks out. So that is a man who carries a negative identity of "I am not stupid" very close to the chest, and it's not enjoyable to interact with the guy. So probably doesn't get invited to as many dinners as he would enjoy. So don't be that guy. And so even in like our little based community we have, you'll see some of these negative identities creep up, like "I am not an NPC," and really emphasize that. I love the theory of NPCs, I really do, but there's a grave danger to just walking around the world closing off certain avenues of exploration because it can really lead you into a place of hatred in your heart, which is not where we want to go. So conversely, a positive identity doesn't mean an optimistic one in this case, but rather it emphasizes who we are. So most men's positive identities today are thinly veiled negative identities. And what that means is that a lot of us are walking around with these very, very thin shells that are extremely vulnerable to cracking if we're cornered, which can lead to certain outbursts. And it's very emotionally immature behavior. But most guys who bring up this dichotomy of positive versus negative identities, they're very quick to weaponize this, and they go against the Stoic code that is holding a lot of adults generation after generation together, because Stoicism, even if it's just blanket Stoicism, has a huge emphasis on duty and things you need to do whether you feel like it or not. But I noticed, and that's why I'm making this episode, is a lot of these new armchair psychologists like myself, I guess, they see this problem of rampant negative identities, especially in men, and like faux positive identities, and say, okay, this is a symptom of the patriarchy and we need to dismantle it. We need to let men be very vulnerable and let men feel like it's okay to abandon their duties if it's too much, or like to not carry their cross, let's say. They so desperately want to use this as an excuse to give themselves permission to lighten the load of the responsibility it takes to be a good adult, a functional society member, one that needs to take on responsibility for others. The rain doesn't save itself if it is to bud the greenery. A mother doesn't save herself if she is to save her child. A soldier doesn't save himself if he is to save his country. Those principles are not just being washed out through laziness, but I believe they're being washed out through careful programming because they do not want you to remember your responsibilities as a society member, as a family member. You need to take on a lot of responsibility because that is what's right. And it's precisely because it's hard that gives it the value it has, a strong value, sacrifice. But I suggest that's not the avenue we want to